My name is Mike, and I've always been obsessed with motorcycles. Ever since I was a teenager, I dreamt of owning my own bike, and when I finally saved enough money to buy a used Harley, it felt like I'd captured that dream. There's something about the roar of the engine, the wind whipping through your hair, and the sheer sense of freedom that only a motorcycle can give you. But as it turns out, that freedom came with a price. Last summer, I had an experience that still haunts me to this day. I'd been invited to a biker rally out in a remote town in the Midwest, somewhere far from the noise of city life. The roads were open, the scenery was beautiful, and the isolation made it the perfect place for a gathering of bikers. I packed everything I needed and set off on my Harley, unaware that this ride would lead me into something I could never forget. After 3 hours of riding, I finally reached the town called Grady Hollow. It was a quiet, almost eerie place, and as I rolled through the main street, I noticed how deserted it felt. The buildings were old, crumbling at the edges, and there was this strange, stagnant air, like the whole place had been forgotten by time. A few rusty cars sat outside a dilapidated gas station, their windows coated in grime. I needed fuel, so I pulled over at the station. There was no one around except for an old man behind the counter, watching me through a pair of cracked, cloudy glasses. His gaze was unsettling, as if he hadn't seen another person in a long time. I tried to ignore the chill creeping up my spine and approached him. "Just need to fill her up," I said, gesturing to my bike. The old man didn't say anything at first, just kept staring. Finally, in a hoarse voice, he muttered, "You heading to the rally?" I nodded, starting to feel uncomfortable. "Yeah, you know where it is." He didn't answer right away, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You best be careful on those roads," he said, his voice raspy, like he hadn't used it in years. "Ain't been a safe place for bikers in a while." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" His expression darkened. "Just stay on the main road and don't ride alone after dark." I shrugged it off, thinking it was just small-town superstition. I paid for the gas and hopped back on my bike, heading towards the rally. I'd been on countless rides through isolated towns before, and nothing bad had ever happened. I didn't think much of his warning at the time, but I'd soon wish I had. The sun was starting to set by the time I reached the outskirts of town. The road stretched endlessly ahead of me, surrounded by dense woods. The deeper I rode into the wilderness, the more uneasy I felt. It wasn't just the isolation. Something felt off, like I was being watched. I tried to shake the feeling, blaming it on the old man's creepy words. Suddenly, the bike started sputtering. I cursed under my breath and pulled over to the side of the road. The engine died completely. No warning, no sign that anything was wrong beforehand, it just stopped. I tried starting it again, but it wouldn't even turn over. "Come on, don't do this now," I muttered, getting off the bike to check the engine. That's when I heard it. Faint at first, like the whisper of a breeze through the trees. A distant hum. No, not a hum, more like an engine. But it wasn't just any engine. It sounded like a motorcycle. The odd thing was, it wasn't getting louder. It stayed distant, as if it was stuck in place, hovering just out of reach. I looked around, expecting to see headlights approaching from behind. But the road was empty, bathed in the last dying light of the sunset. I stood there, straining to figure out where the noise was coming from, but it was like it was everywhere and nowhere at once. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something wasn't right. I tried starting the bike again, my hands shaking a little more than I wanted to admit. The engine roared to life, and I felt a brief sense of relief. But then the noise, the phantom engine, started growing louder. This time, it wasn't distant. It was coming closer, fast. I spun around, half expecting to see another biker racing down the road towards me. But there was nothing, just the sound of an engine, roaring louder and louder, as if something was barreling straight toward me from the shadows. I jumped back onto my bike and peeled out, not caring about the sputtering anymore. I just wanted to get out of there. The engine's roar followed me, keeping pace no matter how fast I rode. It was like something unseen was chasing me, breathing down my neck, but every time I glanced back, the road was empty. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands gripping the handlebars so tightly they ached. I pushed the bike faster, the trees blurring into streaks of darkness. The sun had fully set now, and the only light came from my headlamp, cutting a narrow path through the pitch-black night. And then it happened. The roar of the phantom engine overtook me, and I felt a gust of wind whip past me. For a split second, I saw it. A shadowy figure, speeding alongside me, riding a motorcycle, but not like any I'd ever seen. It was old, ancient even, its frame rusted and twisted, the rider's face hidden behind a black, cracked visor. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel his gaze, cold, hollow, and filled with a malice that chilled me to the bone. The figure shot ahead of me, vanishing into the night as quickly as it had appeared. The roar of its engine faded into the distance, leaving me alone on the road once more. I didn't stop riding until I reached the rally, my hands trembling as I parked the bike. The rally was in full swing, bikers, beer, and the sound of music filling the air. But I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me. I found a spot at the bar and ordered a drink, hoping it would calm my nerves. That's when I overheard a conversation from the group next to me. Two guys were talking, their voices low, almost conspiratorial. "You hear about the old biker who died on that road years back?" One of them said. "Legend says his spirit still rides it, looking for vengeance. They say if you see him, it means you're next." I froze, my drink halfway to my lips. I'd seen him, and deep down I knew this wasn't over. The chill in the air clung to me long after I'd parked my bike at the rally. The beer I was nursing did nothing to steady my hands, and every time I closed my eyes, I could see that shadowy figure racing alongside me. It wasn't just a hallucination or a trick of the light. It was real, too real. The whispers of the bikers at the bar only confirmed what I was afraid to believe. The rider I'd seen wasn't just some legend. He was out there, and I had crossed his path. I tried to shake the feeling off, blaming it on exhaustion and maybe a bit of paranoia, but the deeper I listened to the conversations around me, the harder it became to deny what I'd experienced. A few more bikers joined the group at the bar, and the topic drifted back to the road, always that same stretch of highway. "Grady Hollow's cursed, man?" one grizzled old biker said, his voice gravelly from years of smoking. "It's not just that one rider. Over the years, dozens have gone missing out there. They ride that road, and they're never seen again." I shifted in my seat, my pulse quickening. I hadn't heard about the disappearances, only about the rally itself. "They say it started back in the 80s, another chimed in. "A guy named Jack Blackout Connelly, one of the best riders around. He was known for pushing his bike to the limit, always riding faster than anyone else. But one night, he got caught in a storm out on that road. He never made it home. They found his bike smashed to pieces in the woods, but no sign of him. Not a trace. That's when the sightings began," the old-timer continued. "People started seeing a figure on the road, a dark rider. Sometimes he'd race alongside you, sometimes you'd just hear him behind you. But if he passed you, that was it. You wouldn't be coming back." I sat there, staring into my beer, feeling my heart sink lower with every word they spoke. The shadowy rider I'd seen, it had to be him. Blackout Connelly. Was it a ghost? Some sort of curse? I wasn't the kind of guy to believe in the supernatural, but after what I'd seen on the road, I wasn't so sure anymore. I stood up, trying to clear my head, and made my way outside. The rally was still in full swing, the sound of engines revving and loud rock music filling the air, but it all felt distant, like I was watching it through a haze. My thoughts kept pulling me back to the road, to that moment when the dark rider had overtaken me, and the look in his visor, cold, malevolent, like he had marked me. I needed to get away from the noise, so I wandered further away from the crowd, toward the outskirts of the rally grounds where the forest crept in. There, I found a spot to sit, trying to gather my thoughts. The cool night air bit at my skin, but it wasn't enough to distract me from the creeping fear building inside me. Just as I was starting to calm down, I heard it again, the faint sound of an engine, far off but unmistakable. I froze, listening, hoping I was wrong, but there it was, growing louder, closer. The same sound I'd heard back on the road. My heart hammered in my chest as I stood up, scanning the darkness around me. There was no one else here, just me and the trees swaying in the breeze. But the engine, it was coming from the woods. I turned toward the sound, and for a brief moment, I saw something flicker between the trees, headlights, weaving in and out of the shadows. They blinked in and out of sight like a mirage, but they were getting closer. I backed away, feeling the cold grip of terror tighten around my throat. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The headlights were almost on top of me now, the roar of the engine deafening. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The forest fell into dead silence. I stood there, my breath coming in short gasps, waiting for something to happen. But there was nothing, no rider, no engine, no headlights. Just the stillness of the trees around me. Shaking, I turned and hurried back toward the main rally, back toward the noise and the people. I didn't stop moving until I was back near the crowd, surrounded by bikers, the music blasting in the background. Only then did I feel like I could breathe again. But as I stood there, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination, I felt a presence behind me. Slowly, I turned, half expecting to see nothing. Instead, I saw him, standing at the edge of the rally, just beyond the reach of the bonfire's light, was the figure from the road. His helmet reflected the firelight, his black leather jacket looking almost charred in the glow. His bike was idling quietly beneath him, but I couldn't hear the engine. It was as if he existed outside of the world, silent, watching, and he was watching me. I wanted to scream, to call out, but my throat felt like it was closing up. I blinked, and he was gone, vanished into thin air. But the fear remained. I backed away, bumping into someone behind me, who cursed at me to watch where I was going. I apologized without really hearing them, still shaken by what I'd just seen. Or had I seen it at all? Was my mind playing tricks on me? No one else seemed to notice anything strange. Just me. I couldn't stay here. Not with that thing, whatever it was, following me. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do next. Could I outrun it? Could I leave Grady Hollow and pretend none of this ever happened? But deep down, I knew that wasn't an option. The rider had marked me, and I couldn't escape him just by leaving town. My only chance was to find out more about Blackout Connelly and why his spirit still haunted these roads. I found myself heading back into the gas station, where the old man had warned me earlier. As I approached, I could see him standing at the counter, staring blankly into space. The door creaked as I pushed it open, but he didn't flinch. "I saw him," I said, barely above a whisper. The old man's eyes slowly shifted to me. "I figured you would," he said, his voice like gravel. "Once you're on his radar, there ain't no shaking him." "What does he want?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. The old man sighed, rubbing his temples. "Reckoning. He died on that road, chasing something faster, better, stronger. He never found it, and now his spirit's trapped in that race forever. When he sees a rider he thinks might be worthy, he tests them." I swallowed hard. "Tests them? For what?" "To see if you can outride him," the old man replied, his voice growing darker. "But here's the thing, you can't. No one's ever outridden Blackout. You try, and he'll chase you until you're dead, like all the others." I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. "So what am I supposed to do?" The old man leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Don't ride at night. Don't go back on that road. And most of all, if you hear him behind you, don't look back. Never look back." His words echoed in my mind as I left the station, feeling the gravity of what I was up against. My hands clenched into fists, and a deep, unsettling truth settled in my gut. This wasn't just a ghost story. I was part of it now, and the race wasn't over. For the next few hours, I couldn't shake the old man's words from my mind. "If you hear him behind you, don't look back." It kept playing over and over, each repetition drilling a deeper sense of dread into me. My whole body buzzed with nervous energy as I made my way back to the rally, but I felt disconnected from it all. The roaring engines, the laughter, the smell of burning rubber. It all seemed distant now, like the world was moving without me. My Harley stood parked among the other bikes, its chrome gleaming in the moonlight. For the first time, the sight of my bike didn't fill me with excitement or pride. Instead, a knot of fear tightened in my chest. I wanted nothing more than to leave this place, to put miles between me and Grady Hollow. But deep down, I knew there was no running from this. I thought about the phantom rider, Blackout Connelly, and the way he had appeared, his face hidden behind that cracked visor. That empty, hollow gaze was still with me. He hadn't come for anyone else at the rally. He had come for me, and I knew sooner or later he'd come again. A few hours later, the rally began winding down. The crowds thinned out as bikers started heading back to their tents or motels for the night. But I couldn't bring myself to sleep, not after what I had seen. Every noise made me jump. Every shadow seemed like it was hiding something. I tried to stay among the others, hoping that the noise and the company would keep me safe. But the eerie sensation of being watched never left me. Around midnight, I made my decision. I couldn't just wait for him to come for me. I had to face it, whatever it was. I had to confront Blackout on my own terms, not his. And if there was even the slightest chance of surviving, I needed to understand the rules of this game. I packed up my gear and threw it onto the back of my bike. My heart pounded as I swung my leg over the Harley and started the engine. The sound of it was a comfort, the familiar rumble giving me something to focus on, something to ground myself with. I looked up at the moon hanging low in the sky, casting a ghostly glow over the darkened woods surrounding Grady Hollow. As I revved the engine, I thought of the old man's warning. Don't ride at night. Don't look back. But what choice did I have? I couldn't sit here, waiting for that ghostly figure to find me again. I had to take control of this nightmare. I turned onto the dark stretch of road leading out of town. The trees loomed tall on either side, their branches like skeletal hands reaching over the asphalt. The road stretched on into the blackness, disappearing into the night, and I knew I was heading straight into danger. My stomach churned with a mix of fear and adrenaline, but I pushed forward. Minutes passed in silence, the rhythmic thrum of my bike's engine the only sound. The further I rode, the more isolated I felt. The road seemed endless, a narrow ribbon of asphalt cutting through a sea of trees. I checked my rearview mirror out of habit, but all I saw was darkness. And then, just when I thought maybe I'd been wrong, I heard it, the distant hum of another engine. My heart leaped into my throat. I told myself it was just another biker, maybe someone else heading out from the rally. But as the sound grew louder, I realized it was the same noise, the same ghostly hum that had chased me before. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Blackout. He was here. He had found me. I twisted the throttle, pushing my Harley faster. The engine roared in response, but no matter how much speed I gained, that haunting hum stayed close behind, keeping pace. It was like a shadow, always there, always just out of sight. I could feel his presence now, close, too close. My whole body tensed as I fought the urge to look back. Every instinct screamed at me to check the mirrors, to see how close he was. But I knew the rules. Couldn't look back. Not if I wanted to live. The hum grew louder, more menacing, like a storm bearing down on me. The wind whipped past my face, and I could feel the weight of his gaze burning into the back of my skull. My heart pounded in my chest as I raced down the road, the trees blurring into dark smudges at the edges of my vision. And then there he was. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. He was riding parallel to me now, his blackened helmet and rusted bike cutting through the night like a shadow made flesh. The cracked visor hid his face, but I could feel his eyes on me, feel the challenge in his silent stare. He wasn't just chasing me, he was testing me. The road stretched out in front of us, a narrow path through the dark wilderness. We were the only two riders, locked in a race that felt both inevitable and impossible. His engine roared beside mine, but he never pulled ahead. It was as if he was waiting for something. My hands were slick with sweat, my fingers gripping the handlebars so tight they ached. I forced myself to focus on the road, on the sharp turns and the dips in the asphalt. I had to keep my speed steady, had to keep control, even though every part of me wanted to gun it and leave him behind. But I knew better. He wasn't just some racer I could outrun. He was something else. Something inhuman. The hum of his bike vibrated in my bones, shaking me from the inside out. My pulse thundered in my ears as we raced through the night, side by side. But no matter how fast I went, no matter how far I pushed my Harley, he stayed right there. Never falling behind, never pulling ahead. And then, without warning, he veered toward me. His bike swerved sharply, coming within inches of my own. I jerked the handlebars to the left, barely avoiding a collision. My tires screamed as they skidded along the edge of the road, kicking up gravel. The bike wobbled beneath me, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I might lose control. But I didn't. I held on, my heart slamming against my ribs. He's trying to take me out. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a race. This was a hunt, and I was the prey. He wasn't interested in proving who was faster. He wanted me to crash, to die just like all the others who had crossed his path. I straightened out, gripping the handlebars so tightly my knuckles turned white. He stayed close, his presence looming like a dark cloud beside me. I could hear the metallic whine of his engine, the whisper of something ancient and angry in the air between us. And then I saw it, the end of the road. Up ahead, the highway split into two paths. One led deeper into the forest, winding through the dense trees. The other was a sharp curve that hugged the edge of a steep ravine. Instinctively, I knew which way he wanted me to go. The ravine. He wants me to take the dangerous path. He wants me to fall. I could feel the pull, the weight of his will pressing down on me, urging me toward the edge. I gritted my teeth, fighting the urge to give in, to let him win. I had to make a choice, and fast. I veered left, taking the winding road into the forest, away from the ravine. For a split second, I thought I had outmaneuvered him, that maybe I had broken free. But then I heard it, his engine roaring louder than ever, as he followed me into the trees. The chase wasn't over. Not yet. I weaved through the narrow path, the trees whipping past me in a blur of green and black. The road twisted and turned, sharp bends appearing out of nowhere. But I didn't slow down. Couldn't. He was still there, always just behind me, always on my tail. And then I heard it, a new sound. A screeching, high-pitched wail that cut through the air like a banshee's scream. I risked a glance in the mirror, just a quick one. What I saw nearly made me lose control. Behind me, the figure of Blackout Connelly was changing. His bike was no longer the rusted, twisted machine I had seen before. It was warping, its frame stretching and twisting into something unnatural. His helmet, too, was cracking open, revealing something dark and monstrous beneath. The race was over. Now the hunt had truly begun. My breath hitched in my throat as I glimpsed the nightmare that was unfolding behind me. Blackout Connelly was no longer just a shadowy figure on a rusted bike. He was transforming, his form warping into something unearthly, something far worse than I could have imagined. The helmet that once hid his face was now splitting apart, jagged pieces peeling back like charred metal, revealing a darkness underneath, an absence where a face should have been. Just a hollow void, and from it came that screeching wail, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. The bike beneath him twisted and groaned, its frame stretching unnaturally, wheels spinning faster than they should. It wasn't a machine anymore. It was part of him, some extension of his cursed existence, melding with the road like it was feeding off it. I had to escape. I had to. I ripped my eyes away from the mirror, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The trees around me were closing in, the narrow road winding through the dense forest like a maze designed to trap me. I couldn't let myself be caught here, not by whatever Blackout had become. I twisted the throttle, pushing my Harley to its limits, the engine roaring beneath me as the road sped by in a blur. But no matter how fast I went, he was always there, always on my tail. I could hear his engine now, louder than ever, rumbling like a thunderstorm crashing down on me. The trees whipped past in a frenzy, the road bending sharply, throwing me from one curve to the next. But even in the chaos, I knew something with terrifying certainty. He was no longer just racing me. He was toying with me, and he wouldn't stop until he had me. The screeching wail grew louder, and I felt the air around me change, grow heavier, darker, colder. It was like the night itself was pressing down on me, wrapping me in its suffocating embrace. The temperature dropped sharply, the warmth of the summer night replaced with an icy chill that seeped into my bones. My breath fogged in front of me, and for a second, the world around me seemed to warp, like I was riding through some twisted version of reality where the rules no longer applied. Suddenly, the road ahead forked again. The path to the left disappeared into a dense wall of trees. The one to the right curved sharply downhill, vanishing into the shadows below. There wasn't much time to decide seconds, maybe. I could feel him closing in, feel the weight of his presence looming just behind me. I took the curve to the right, the tires of my bike screeching as I leaned hard into the turn. The road plunged steeply, and I had to fight to keep control as the Harley sped downhill, gravity pulling me faster and faster. My heart was racing, my mind a blur of fear and adrenaline. But I didn't dare look back. Not now. Don't look back. Never look back. The road leveled out into a narrow stretch, flanked by towering cliffs on one side and a deep, shadowy ravine on the other. My headlights barely pierced the darkness ahead, but I could make out the outline of a bridge, old and weathered, just up ahead. If I could make it to the bridge, maybe, just maybe, I could lose him. But as I sped toward it, the screeching wail behind me became deafening. It was so loud, so all-encompassing, that I could barely think straight. My body was shaking, my hands gripping the handlebars like my life depended on it, because it did. Then, without warning, the screeching stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise. It was unnatural, oppressive, like the whole world had gone still, waiting for something terrible to happen. I risked a glance to the side, at the ravine that stretched down into darkness. The shadows seemed to shift and writhe, like something was moving deep within them. That's when I saw him. He wasn't on the road anymore, he was above me. Blackout Connelly, or whatever he had become, was hovering just off the edge of the cliff, his twisted bike floating in the air, defying all logic. His hollow visor stared down at me, the void where his face should have been pulsing with an unnatural light. His bike roared to life, and in an instant, he dove toward me, like a predator swooping in for the kill. I slammed the throttle, pushing the Harley to its absolute limit as I barreled toward the bridge. My pulse raced with the bike's engine, both pounding in unison as the gap between me and Blackout closed. His shadow loomed larger and larger, and I could feel the cold breath of death on the back of my neck. The bridge came into view, a rickety, narrow thing made of old wood and rusted metal. It stretched across the ravine, barely wide enough for a single vehicle. I didn't have a choice. I had to make it across or I'd be done for. But just as I approached, Blackout lunged. His bike slammed into the ground beside me, sending a shockwave through the road that nearly knocked me off balance. I swerved hard, trying to regain control, but the tires skidded on the edge of the ravine. For a brief, terrifying moment, I felt the bike tip, felt the pull of gravity as it leaned toward the abyss. And then, somehow, I regained control, swerving back onto the road. I shot across the bridge, the old wood creaking and groaning beneath the weight of my bike. I could feel it shaking, feel the planks shifting under my wheels, but I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I kept going, pushing forward, knowing that the only way out was through. Behind me, Blackout roared in fury. The bridge shook violently as he followed, his bike tearing across the wooden planks with a speed that defied everything I knew about physics. He was gaining on me fast. I was halfway across the bridge when I heard it. A loud crack, followed by the unmistakable sound of wood splintering. The bridge was giving way. I didn't have time to think, only react. I gunned the throttle one last time, pushing the Harley as hard as it would go. The end of the bridge was just ahead, but I could feel the wood collapsing beneath me, feel the whole structure shaking and falling apart. And then I jumped. The Harley soared through the air, weightless for a brief second before crashing back down onto solid ground on the other side of the ravine. I skidded to a stop, barely managing to keep the bike upright as I came to a halt. My heart was in my throat, my hands trembling, but I was alive. I looked back just in time to see Blackout Connelly's twisted form hurtling toward me. He was too close, too fast, and the bridge beneath him was falling apart. With a deafening crash, the bridge gave way, and Blackout plunged into the ravine below, his bike vanishing into the darkness. The sound of his engine echoed off the walls of the canyon, growing fainter and fainter until there was only silence. I sat there, breathless, staring down into the abyss where he had disappeared. The air was still, the cold gone, the night returning to normal. I could hear the wind rustling the trees, the distant chirp of crickets. It was over, but even as I sat there, trying to comprehend what had just happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Blackout Connelly had fallen, but something told me he wasn't gone for good. I had survived for now, but I knew deep down, the ghost of that road would always be there, lurking, waiting for the next rider foolish enough to cross his path. With trembling hands, I started the Harley and rode away, leaving the broken bridge and the haunted road behind me. But as the miles stretched on, as the darkness swallowed the road ahead, I couldn't help but glance into my rearview mirror. And in the distance, just for a moment, I thought I saw him, still riding, still chasing, waiting.